It's LaTravian McCutcheon who's trying to take it in for the pick six, and he does.
It's a pull-up. Flemings. Oh, he wanted it, and he got it.
Talk about onions, that kid.
Pressure again off the edge. Wigman has Koziel. He's got room to run. Touchdown.
Stick it in your pipe and smoke it, baby.
Yes! Welcome to Scott Holland Podcast. Back tonight, less than 3 weeks from the return of Houston Cougar football. I don't allow myself to start counting the days until we're down to single digits. We are not down to single digits. I don't believe we will be down to single digits until 2 episodes from now, though I could be getting the math wrong on that, but close enough that we can taste it, far enough away that I'm not counting down the days. So we've got some Cougar football to talk about as we look ahead to the season here in just under 3 weeks this week, previewing the Cougar defense and special teams. And we have on-field Cougar sports to talk about, as well as the Cougar soccer team. Kicked off the Cougar sports season at large and their respective sports season in action last Wednesday. We're going to talk about that and our thoughts from watching that one as well. Bobby, how are we doing tonight, friend?
Good, man. Really excited to talk some Cougar sports with you. Indoors where it's not currently 105 degrees, which I know I'm talking to somebody who lives in Vegas, so barking up wrong trees and stuff. But holy
honestly,
moly,
man,
it's been hot, man.
It is your lot in life right now with weather is worse than mine. There might be a small window where it's like although it hasn't gotten to like 116, 117 here. At that point, I'm like, okay, I've got it worse. Right now it is a cool 104 degrees according to my laptop. Last week we actually got some rain. One of the 3 or 4 times, one of the 3 or 4 times this year I have seen the clouds pour precipitation on where I live, which is always a nice little treat. But we'll cut short the weather talk here. We'll mention the top as we always do. Patreon.com/SHPAWDcast, Patreon.com/SHpodcast is the place you can go if you want to support the work that Bobby and I do on a weekly basis, in season, off season, preseason, as we're doing right now. We're always here talking the Cougs, and if you want to support the work that we do as the internet's longest running Houston Cougar sports podcast, please, one more time, go to patreon.com/SHpodcast. I will give a shorter plug also for my little writing project, Claws and Effect, CALAWSN effect.substack.com. If you like little written Cougar stuff on a weekly basis, going to try and make it twice weekly once we hit the season, once we get out of the true preseason and we have all fall sports back in action. You like Cougar written content in your inbox, always written by a human being and not your AI prompt of choice. Please go to clawsineffect.substack.com. But we will start tonight by continuing our 2026 Cougar football preview series. After our offensive preview last week, we are back previewing the Cougar defense and special teams units for the coming season. Bobby's wearing one of those old school linebacker neck rolls with some shoulder pads. I've shaved my head and cut my beard down to a goatee so I could look like every defensive line coach in history. Truly, we are in the defensive frame of mind here for this show. In all seriousness, if any college football fan base knows the perils of having a team with a good or very good offense and a defense that also can't stop a nosebleed, it's those of us who've watched Houston Cougar football for at least several years. The good news is I don't think we're living in a reality this coming season where there are many scenarios where U of H experiences the kinds of struggles I just described on the defensive side of the ball. And cast our minds back to about 12 months ago, Bobby. Going into last season, we did have some questions that needed answering with this defense. I mean, you were losing your top defensive backs. AJ Halsey and Jeremiah Wilson had gone to the portal. You graduated also key guys in a very good defensive front like Michael Batten, Keith Cooper Jr., and Jamal Morris. You had a new defensive coordinator, Austin Armstrong, taking over after Sheil Wood left for Tech. And that 2025 defense may have been very marginally worse last season than it was in 2024, but for the balance of the season was still the better of the two primary units. And now you go into 2026, not, I guess, devoid of any questions. You're graduating key guys like Latrell McCutcheon Jr., or Senior, Carlos Allen, Eddie Walls. But you have Armstrong back as defensive coordinator, and in my opinion, fewer on-field questions than you had going into last season. Starting out like we did last time, Bobby, give me your any big picture thoughts you have on the Cougar defense and special teams that you want to lead with, and like we did with the offense, the thing you were most confident about here in the preseason, and the thing you might have some questions about.
Yeah, I think for the thing I'm confident about, I was down to two things, and I kind of wrestled with these two things. Number one was probably going to be a little surprising, and that was Liam Daughtry coming back. I know it sounds weird to talk about a punter, but one that can flip the field like Liam has shown the ability to do at times for for a defense that might have a couple of question marks here and there. It's not something too bad, but the real reason that I feel optimistic is that Austin Armstrong and the staff. I know we had a lot of questions last year, as you kind of alluded to, is what would this Austin Armstrong defense look like? It didn't look great at Florida, but you return it, you get a second year of the system. You don't have to deal with losing the coach again, which we could talk about what might happen after the season or anything like that if this defense looks really good. But heading into this year, you do get Austin Armstrong back. You return a lot of people, but that coaching staff is really giving me the confidence heading into this year. And just the fact Willie Fritz hasn't really had a bad defense per se since he got here. I think, as you alluded to, it's been the better of the two sides of the ball the last every year he's been here except but even last year, right? This year may be the first time that we go against that, but there's been no reason or anything I've seen from Coach Fritz and his ability to choose coordinators that makes me think that this defense won't be good this year. And then kind of the thing that gives me a little pause, maybe I'm a little shaky on, is just the defensive line, which we'll get into here in a minute. You lose Carlos Allen, and any position that loses the best player on a side of a ball is, you are assuming, going to get a little bit weaker. You bring in a lot of really good talent transfer wise, but you bring in some guys who maybe haven't been on the field a ton at other places. So you have some question marks on the defensive line, but overall, and we'll get into this more when we talk about the defensive line here in a minute, but I would say that's probably where it is. And it's just because of who you lost. Like I said, you lose Eddie Walls, you lose Carlos Allen. Those are two really good players for you. And you're relying on transfers, and you don't exactly know exactly what you're going to get. So overall, I would say that's what makes me just a little bit nervous, is that defensive line. So what about you?
Even with the loss of Latrell McCutcheon, good cornerback both the seasons he started U of H, the thing I'm most confident about collectively, defense and special teams, I really love the starting secondary that you're going to be bringing into 2026. That was a bigger question a year ago. I mentioned Halsey and Jeremiah Wilson entering the portal after last season. And yes, you did have Kentrell Webb and Latrell McCutcheon back to that unit, but just about everyone else was pretty new to seeing a lot of the field, if not new to the roster. Will James now comes into the season ready to be your veteran corner, with second team All Big 12 last year, 3 interceptions and a pick 6. Graded out well as a tackler, which is a really underrated thing. I think quarterback is the position in the broadest sense where you're least sure of a guy's ability to tackle, and Will James was very sure there. I think the secondary as a whole tackled quite well. You're bringing in Jalen Mayo from SFA, admittedly unproven at this level, but he's already done the make a jump to a higher level of competition once in his college career. Smarter football people than me think he's going to be more than ready at this level, was really, really good at the lower levels. You have to squint to look at him and see, oh yeah, that's why this guy didn't start his career playing FBS football, but is certainly finishing it there. You kind of see why. Not a proven depth, not of other proven guys behind those two at corner, but if you have James and Mayo healthy for most of the season, I really, really like what U of H has at corner. And the safety group is even more proven. Kentrell Webb is about to enter his 4th season as a starter for a Willie Fritz team, his 3rd at U of H after playing for Fritz as a freshman. At Tulane, Jordan Allen returning. after starting last season as well. CJ Douglas may be ready to play a bigger role in the secondary as part of your safety rotation last year. He's back. Javion White comes in after starting 16 games in the past 2 seasons and earning all conference honors last season at Tulane. Have to imagine he's coming here to play a lot. Your secondary is always going to be dependent on other aspects of the defense, i.e., can you get a pass rush that's not putting your guys out there in coverage for way too long? Can you be stout enough against the run, just generally from your defensive front, that opposing offenses don't just choose to eat you alive that way and not really need to do much against the secondary? Not that I'm not confident in those areas, but I think that's always worth acknowledging when you talk about secondary. But I really like what the Cougars have coming back and are adding to the existing group, and I have a hard time not seeing. I think last year's secondary was pretty good. I think this is going to look a lot more like 2024, which was a very good secondary. I think that's what the 2026 group is going to look like. The thing I still have questions about, it was kind of funny. I chuckled a bit on the inside when you went with the special teams thing, because I'm going with the special teams thing for my, still having questions about answer. I'm going with the kicking game. Not that there aren't areas of the defense, you mentioned defensive line, where you graduate 2 very key guys where you might have some more questions in other areas, though on the whole, I would say I'm reasonably happy with what U of H has there at all levels. But I have many more questions about the kicking game than I do any hypothetical questions about any part of the defense. I mean, factually, there's very little kicking experience in actual Division I games on this roster. From the people on the ground, Jonathan Demas sounds like he's the favorite in fall camp, probably most likely to be your first choice place kicker come the opener against Oregon State, and has been in the program the longest of all the guys who are currently on your roster as kickers, even though he didn't appear at a game in his previous 2 college seasons. Zach Yoakum's back after being your kickoff specialist last year. 2 seasons ago, did kick some from Notre Dame, was 18 for 18 on point afters, 2 for 5 on field goals. Most likely he'll just be your kickoff specialist again this year. And you brought in Evan Noel from the portal, who is an elite kicker recruit, kicked the longest field goal in Mississippi high school history, but didn't see the field last season at Florida as a freshman. I mean, that's a big unknown. We all, myself included, probably took for granted last season how good Ethan Sanchez truly was. Someone who wasn't just reliable inside of 40 yards, but who you could actually talk yourself into, and quite often did hit from long range as well. I would say won at least one game, referring to the Arizona walk-off, but probably multiple games where him being reliable at kicker really did flip it for you in a positive way. Maybe one of the 3 guys who I've name checked here becomes a really good kicker, but odds are you're going to get someone who's at least a little worse than what Sanchez was last season, which puts more pressure on your offense and defense to do their part, to not be in a game where you're relying on a really consistent kicking game like you definitely had last season, because odds are you don't have it, or you don't have it to the level that you had it in 2025. Maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, hopefully it doesn't matter, and this team is so improved offensively and defensively that none of these games really hinge on your kicking being that reliable, but the odds are against that. You'll probably at least have some games where it's close enough to where kicking might make or break the outcome. Even really good teams will play close games where kicking plays a major role, and right now in the preseason, I think you could only call that at least somewhat of a question.
Yeah, and if you have a good kicker, it's a weapon, man. Like, if you know that once you hit the 30, you're getting 3. You hit the 30-yard line and you're picking up 3 points automatically, or the 35 even. Like, yeah, man, that's absolutely a weapon, and it allows you to be a little bit more aggressive on second downs and third downs, knowing that, oh, we got 3 kind of handled here. It takes that decision out where you go, oh, should we go for it here since we're on their side? We're in plus territory. We're kind of on the edge. If you know that your kicker's just going to come in and is automatic from 45, that's a weapon, man. That's something you can absolutely take advantage of. And so, yeah, I don't necessarily think you're wrong there.
Like I said, not that we didn't appreciate it in real time, having a kicker as good as Ethan Sanchez, but there will probably, this is not me being negative, there will probably come a time in this season where you think to ourselves, man, I do kind of miss having a veteran automatic kicker like Sanchez was for you last season.
Yep.
So we'll look at the defense unit by unit, starting up front, and then we'll kind of work our way back, talking first about the Cougar defensive line. Already mentioned who is not here, but worth another one. Carlos Allen and Eddie Walls both graduated after last season. Allen is currently in training camp with his home state Atlanta Falcons as we record this tonight. Those two guys represent the 2025 defense as the leading tackler and sacks leader. So not insignificant losses there, but plenty returning and a very veteran incoming transfer group who you can easily find multiple starters from, or at least key contributors from, if you take a look at them. For the returners, you have Khalil Lafau back after starting 12 games at defensive end last season. That was his first in the program after transferring over from Wazoo. Trey McCutcheon technically doesn't play a hand-down defensive line position, but I would say that Jack, which is kind of a D-line linebacker hybrid position, probably his best group with the D-line for our sake to kind of delineate and preview by unit here. From all the smart people who are on the ground and have covered spring practices and fall camp this year, it sounds like we'll be seeing a combination of last year's number 2 sacks guy, Brandon Mack, and McCutcheon sharing the reps of the Jack position. Probably McCutcheon more in the rundowns, Mack more in the obvious passing downs, maybe kind of a third down guy there. For that transfer group I just mentioned, Demarion Thomas comes in as the guy I think most likely to replace Carlos Allen at the nose guard position week 1 after playing last season at Oklahoma State, played previously for Vandy. I do think Isaiah Broughton is a guy to watch long-term there. Good high 3-star recruiter came in the 2026 class, but I think with any interior defensive line position, short of having an Ed Oliver level guy coming in there, you can't and probably shouldn't count on a guy who's 1 year removed from high school playing a really big role in the interior defensive line. It is always a pleasant surprise when it happens. Not really counting on it here. Also, Ashton Porter comes back to Houston after 3 seasons at Oregon, played in every game for the Ducks last season, a college football playoff team. I said it when we talked about his commitment at the beginning of this year, the end of last year, whenever we did it. He certainly came here looking for a bigger role than he had at Oregon and was most likely to get if he had stayed around in that program. But that we're getting a guy who got on the field for one of the sport's elite powers consistently was enough for me to be excited about the commitment when it happened, and enough for me to get excited now. You also have Ejiro Egbara coming in as a super senior from Yale, was first team all Ivy League there before missing last season injured. That's kind of an overview of the names we got, at least the starting level. Bobby, what are your thoughts on the defensive front and the guys we have there?
Yeah, initially I thought we were going to be fine heading into the season, and then you kind of realize you lose Carlos Allen and Eddie Walls. You mentioned him. I really like that Ashton Porter signing. Coming over from Oregon, 20 tackles last year. Would really like to see him get to the quarterback just a little bit more. I think he had 1 sack last year. And if he's going to come in and be a defensive end here, really would like to see him get to that quarterback a little bit more, maybe being on the field a little bit more. Like you had mentioned, he probably wanted a little bit more playing time. Maybe getting that extra playing time is going to get him a few more sacks. He can kind of get in a rhythm there. But he's got a ton of athleticism. Just kind of going back and looking when he was being recruited out of Cyprus, was, like you said, get closer to home, get some more playing time. And he probably will start here, like everything from the ground is saying, that'll probably start and get significant time. I do believe that this unit could be really good. Hell, I think it could be better than last year, even at times, even though, like you said, you do lose your number 1 tackler and your number 1 sack getter, but I think it could be really good. You're hoping Demarion Thomas from Oklahoma State can come in and replace what left with Carlos Allen. He did have 13 tackles in only 4 games last year with the Pokes. But, you kind of hope that you get his 2024 season even more from when he was with Vanderbilt. He had 34 tackles that year at Vandy. You'd love to see that level of production from him. Overall, I think with the transfers and what you have on the line, you'd probably love to see more pass production. But they could be very good. You got a lot of athleticism. You got a lot of guys who, like you said with Ashton Porter, played a good amount on a really good Oregon team, Oregon defense. Got to play quite a bit for them. So really feels like they could be really good. Kind of feels like this defensive line is a little bit boom or bust for me. I think they could be one of the best in the Big 12, or even one of the best in the country if everything lives up and goes perfectly. But on the other hand, if they fall a little flat, I also wouldn't be shocked by that. So just because you're depending on the transfers coming in, not a lot of returning production, and how do they fit into a system and kind of the unknown of that. So I think this D line, like I said, could be even better than next year. I just don't know a ton of will they be, how do they fit in the system, and you kind of have to trust the coaching staff, like I said earlier, to know what makes good fits. It doesn't seem like Coach Fritz has brought in a bunch of guys in the past who transfer in and haven't been good fits for what he's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I remember Keith Cooper Jr. and Carlos Allen coming in before the 2024 season. I felt pretty good. I remember Cooper coming in, and I was pretty excited about him. He was one of Tulane's better defensive players. I was like, all right, I could see how this guy translates to the Big 12. Carlos Allen came in, not that he was under our radar, but I don't believe either of us expected the really awesome 2-year career that we got from him in the red and white before he's moved on to the pros. So yeah, I agree. Like, the defensive talent identification has been pretty good, but it's not a guarantee that happens, which I think was your point. And you are relying on a lot of new faces, which I think increases the unknown. What I had with Thomas, I didn't have this in my notes. I just looked up while you were talking here. Was on the first Vandy team to be bowl eligible under their current head coach, and probably the team that got their current momentum started was there 2 seasons ago when they went to a bowl. I know Diego Pavia, for the seasons he was there, was the real public facing guy in that program, but that first season where they finally got over the hump and got to bowl eligibility was largely on the strength of that defense. So played a lot on a pretty good SEC defense, which I think is no small feat, and strengthens my belief that he'll be pretty good in the middle, even if the standard of how active Carlos Allen was as a leading tackler, as an interior defensive lineman, probably a high bar there. Like, no offense to Marion Thomas, but probably not going to be your leading tackler this year. We'll gladly be wrong if he is just an absolute monster in the middle, but probably not. But also a guy I don't have to do too much squinting at to see why he's here and why he's starting. I mean, I like the starting group. I have no problem convincing myself it'll be at least as good as last season's, but I'm also not sure, or as sure, on the depth, because inevitably you're going to want to rotate. You're not going to play the same 3 or 4 guys between the 3 down lineman positions and the jack position. You're going to do a lot of rotating there. I like Mack and McCutcheon at the jack position. I like the general starting group that we have here. You have more question. You're getting to more guys who haven't played as much necessarily in their college career, but it becomes a bit more of a question mark. And I've seen the people who were out there at fall camp kind of talk about that maybe being a bit of a questioning of the starting unit. I think we both feel pretty good about, not saying the good rotation guys behind your starting group don't exist on the roster. Just feel like finding that rotation is something we're going to need to figure out over the course of the season. Maybe something that it's why it's good that your first 2 games, I mean, your third game is very challenging. Your third game is kind of going to be a cold slap in the face there when you go up to Texas Tech to start conference play, but you do have a couple of games to at least do some experimenting there, with all respect to the Oregon State and Southern football teams. We don't always mention the position coach because, and I think those guys would actually agree with the sentiment, not that good coaches don't matter. They very much do, but we try to make it about the players here. And with so much to talk about in terms of previewing the 2026 team, we're already jam-packed with content. But I made a note to be sure to mention the Cougars defensive line coach, Oscar Giles, because he's now coached 4 different U of H defensive lines to be started in this podcast. He was actually, I looked this up, he was actually Bryles' defensive line coach his first 2 seasons here as well, but I can't speak to those seasons because I wasn't really an engaged Cougar fan at that point in my high school life. But he's coached 4 different defensive lines, and he's 4 for 4 on all of those units being very high performing. Was here the 2 Herman seasons, and he's been here for Willie Fritz's first 2 seasons. The man can coach defensive line. And more than any other position group, offense or defense, that we're going to talk about, I have faith of at least a pretty high floor for this defensive line, simply because Giles is coaching it. And I think they could be even better than pretty good. Like, I think the ceiling here is pretty high, like you said, like I believe I've said, but the floor here is also very high. And I certainly hope we have Oscar Giles coaching this group here for the foreseeable future, because he's just done a very good job at coaching guys up and consistently putting good units on the field.
Yeah, that's a great observation there.
We'll go next to the linebackers. By general personnel groupings, probably the smallest in number of the Cougar defense, but that isn't me saying it's not an important one as well. I'm showing my age here as someone who grew up watching football when the 3-4 and even the 4-4, that's a bit of throwback, base alignments were fairly common. You don't really see those anymore. Usually the Cougars will be playing with two linebackers, even though, like I said earlier, you can kind of make the case that the Jack is also a linebacker or a defensive line position. You do lose Jalen Garner to graduation from this group, a guy who is a real testament to patience paying off, was recruited by the last staff here and stuck around under the current staff, worked his way from being kind of a rotation guy to one of your top tacklers last season on a good defense. You also lost Corey Platt, who transferred to Tech. Never a guy who worked his way into being a full-time starter last season, but I think a pretty incredible story, him getting back in the field after devastating injuries cost him basically the entirety of the 23 and 24 seasons. And I feel pretty good about the combination of what the Cougs have coming back and coming in at linebacker. Jaden Yates was one of the biggest portal additions from any position on defense. Comes in from Ole Miss after starting 9 games there last season. Played in every game for a very good Rebel defense, finishing last season with 55 total tackles. Did lose his job, at least starting job, down the stretch of that season. But if he was good enough to at least be a rotation guy in one of the better defenses in the country, that's good enough for me. 2 seasons ago was one of the top tacklers in the country, first team all conference, and on at least one All-American team. At Marshall as a sophomore, he's really exciting at. Purely, honestly, if he was just coming in straight from Marshall with that resume, I'd be excited.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say he lit the world on fire at Ole Miss, but he also didn't get buried in the depth chart either, was good enough to play consistently in the field for them. You also have UH legacy Miller Malone, little brother of the Heisman kid from the 2011 College Game Day, coming in from Western Kentucky after 2 seasons there. Should at least be in the rotation, though. Would be surprised if he's doing anything more than that. And then safe bet, probably Yates starting alongside returning linebacker Sione Fotu, who joined the Cougs before last season from Utah, started 12 games here last season, led the Big 12 in fumble recoveries, graded well by PFF in rush defense among Big 12 linebackers as well. Could also possibly see previous UALA trades for Carmega Glass, who had 27 tackles, a forced fumble last year, and Christian Brathwaite in the rotation as well. My biggest takeaway here, Bobby, is that I wouldn't be comfortable with every single player I just named starting, but I feel very good about the likely starters, and I also believe there are more than 2 guys who could capably fill a starting role if pressed into duty. I don't know exactly what that number is. I just think it's something more than 2, which I think is where you want to be for this linebacker group.
Yeah, I think kind of to your point, I really see a lot of depth in this room. Like you said, maybe you don't want all of them starting, but there's definitely enough where if somebody goes down, you kind of are like, okay, I think we can have somebody there. There won't be a massive drop off. I talk about this in just about every sport. Raising the floor really feels like your floor, if you do lose a guy, doesn't drop off dramatically. Heading down, you mentioned Brandon Mack from Ole Miss and Javion White from Tulane, both starters on really good defenses. It should be a pretty good linebacking core. Um, you mentioned everyone you lost, but I think the thing to watch is how healthy can they stay. It does feel fairly deep in terms of the floor, but once you kind of get to that 3 deep kind of level, you start to drop off. But I think that's true with any team at just about any position group. If you have to get to your, if you're on your 3rd tackle or your 4th offensive tackle, you're kind of going, yeah, we probably are in a little bit of trouble here. But overall, the linebacking core, I think you did pretty good job of replacing some of the guys with those guys that we had mentioned in Brandon Mack and Javion White, or Jaden Yates. I'm sorry, Jaden Yates. And so I think you're going to see some talent here on the linebacking core. I think your other 2 sides, is, the other two position groups, the D line and the defensive backs are gonna kind of hide a little bit what you might be lacking in the linebacking core. But overall, pretty excited about what you see defensively with this linebacking group.
As I said earlier in the preview, the Cougar secondary is, in my opinion, the biggest reason to be optimistic about the 2026 defense. It's a position group that is really in that sweet spot of lots of returning experience and multiple incoming transfers who you don't have a hard time talking yourself into being key guys. Yes, you're replacing a multi-year starter in Latrell McCutcheon Sr., also a good 1 year portal ad in Rook Brown. And I think one of last year's more underrated guys, big cornerback Zelmar Vetter, who's actually
Mm-hmm.
currently in the Kansas City Chiefs training camp. But by snaps and contributions, all of your key guys who could have returned are back. Bobby, I gave plenty of my thoughts on the secondary earlier. We were kind of talking about our positives and the thing we have questions about it at the start here and why I'm high on this Cougar secondary. So give me your thoughts on this group.
Yeah, overall, I feel really good about this secondary group. You bring back Will James, Jordan Allen, and Kentrell Webb, all guys who were really good players in the secondary for you. You get to keep them in the system yet again with the same coordinator, with the same coaching staff. Guys who looked really comfortable in this system, especially late in the season, are returning. And as you and Dustin used to say on the podcast, development isn't always linear, but you do know that as you keep coordinators and you keep secondaries rely on a lot of communication, knowing where the other guy is going to be. You have three returning starters who are who played well last year. It's not like you have, because sometimes you see, oh, he returns and he's back, but he didn't really play a ton. No, these three guys played quite a bit for this team last year, and so I think the secondary, I kind of said the D line concerns me a little bit just because you don't know exactly what you have with those transfers and will they fit the system. I think you're going to see quite a few covered sacks this year, and I think it's going to help make the defense look much better, or the defensive line look even better, and it's going to really help if, especially as you pointed out early in the season, and you're able to get comfortable and really figure out what you got going on with that defensive line, and then not to like look ahead at the schedule too much, but you had mentioned week 3 with Texas Tech. They have a quarterback that might get a little. He might start seeing some ghosts if you can hit him early. And I think this secondary might be the secondary that can at least make Texas Tech think a little bit harder about what they need to do, and it may not be as easy as they think. So I think the secondary is going to be the backbone of this defense, and it's going to help make other parts of this defense look really good this year.
Yeah, and I think it's, when it comes to that Tech game you mentioned, I think it's also going to be, can you hold up front? Like, can you keep them honest? Because I do think you genuinely have the pieces here. Did mention earlier, I think the only thing you're really sweating with a secondary is keeping your first. I mean, you always want to keep your first choice players healthy. That's about the most obvious observation that you could make about really any unit on any team, other than the teams that are just absolutely stacked. And even those teams these days with the portal, even those teams are losing a lot of those guys that they may have been able to stash 10 or 15 years ago and have them waited out till they're a third or fourth year guy. Those guys are a lot quicker to leave these days. But at cornerback in particular, if you have Jalen Mayo and Will James healthy for the majority of the games this season, I think this will be a really strong group. If you're missing one or both of those guys, I do think the job gets harder. One thing I like with Mayo, who, again, we'll note is making a pretty big leap going from being a very good FCS defense to playing not just FBS football, but playing in a good power FBS football conference. He is coming over with his secondary coach from SFA, Marcus Trice, who joined the Cougars as their cornerbacks coach after last season, before this one. So just wanted to note that there as well. My big picture thought here, now that I've gone from being I'm generally aware of what the defense has to now having done the prep work, having dived into previewing this unit. I think there's a ceiling and floor realistically that you feel pretty good about in either scenario as a Cougar fan. The floor is something like we saw last year, maybe a little worse if none of your returning incoming guys really blossom. Like they remain, let's say, like roughly where they were, which is pretty good players, but you don't see the pop, you don't see the development across the board that maybe you were hoping for in close to the best case scenarios. But still, that defense still gives you more than enough to win way more games than you lose with an offense that we both expect to be some amount of improved over last season. And the ceiling, in my opinion, is closer to what you saw 2 years ago. A really strong ball hawking defense, especially with now more experienced secondary that's still stout against the run and can make a strong case for being one of the best handful of defenses in the Big 12. I think barring something catastrophic or unexpected, I don't foresee a major fall off because you have continuity on the coaching side, you have continuity on the player side, and incoming transfers who you can make a pretty straightforward case for being the kinds of immediate impact transfers you want to have. I don't know if U of H has a top 25 offense or defense by any of the metrics, but if you're just outside of the top 25 in both of these major phases, then you're most likely a very good team. And of course, we'll talk about the Cougar special teams, where I think you have the biggest number of questions for any of the units we're going to talk about tonight, though I'm not entirely negative on what the Cougars have with their special teams either. Addressed it earlier, kicking is a big question mark, though it sounds like third-year guy Jonathan Demas has the inside track to be the first-choice place kicker. I don't have Ethan Sanchez levels of expectation because that would be unfair. I would just like Demas or whomever wins the job to be consistent on the easy stuff, which I would say is 40 yards or in on field goals and sometimes capable of hitting stuff from longer range. Like I would love to line up from 47, 48 yards. I'm not 100% because even last season when I should have been, when Sanchez really was that good, I still had a little bit lingering in the back of my mind. Like, I don't know if he's going to hit this.
Yeah, I mean, Ethan Sanchez also was 21 of 26. It's not like he was 25 of 26, but
I mean, 21 of 26 is really good. 21 of 26 is better than like nearly all of the Cougar kicking seasons that you and I have witnessed now in 20-something years.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong about that. He did have that 52-yarder as well. But yeah, you're not wrong about the kicking heading into this season. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. And I think maybe where we see it is that you had Sanchez attempt 26 field goals last year. I don't foresee that being the case this year. I don't think the staff will or should really have as much confidence in their kicking game as they did last year when they had a veteran guy who had proven a fair amount before he even put on a Cougar uniform that he was a pretty good college kicker. You just don't have that this year for better or for worse. Liam Doherty's back, and which should be his third season as a Cougar starting punter, was solidly top half of the Big 12 in the key areas you'd want to see from a punter: punts down inside the 20, hang time, yards per punt average, those kinds of things. Really noticeably improved his yardage average from his freshman to his sophomore season, so from 2024 to 25. Another slight improvement here going to his junior season, and I think we're talking about one of the best punters in the Big 12, maybe a few less punts down for touchbacks as well. That's really the only weakness I could see in terms of what he did last year as a punter. The return game is going to have some new faces, which isn't exactly the worst thing. I remember the now graduated Mekhi Muse having a really promising start to his U of H career 2 seasons ago. He had a return against OU, which you might remember because you were there in Norman. They got called back, I think, for a really I want to say it was a really questionable holding call.
Yeah, I think so. It was like that or running into the
it was definitely one of those. And I remember thinking, this guy's going to pop. And that should be a reminder that I'm not always right about these things. And unfortunately never really became a difference maker in the return game, despite being your primary kick and punt returner last season. Even though I believe we will see this guy get some defensive snaps, this is where I believe we'll really see one of your star recruits, Paris Melvin Jr., make his earliest impact for the Cougs. There may be some growing pains with that, but I am maybe more confident than I should be that he is going to eventually be in the conversation with some of the other really great returners that we've been fortunate enough to watch in our time as Cougar fans. I'm keeping an eye on Jacquees Martin for returns as well. He's had a good fall camp at receiver from what it sounds like. did a little returning last year, really profiles as kind of the smaller, shifty guy who's a good fit in the return game as well. Those are just my general thoughts on the special teams. What do you got, Bobby?
Yeah, I totally see your concern with the kicking game in terms of your field goal kicking. It can be a weapon, and there were definitely times last year where Ethan Sanchez was a weapon for you and was able to really get out there and make some decisions a little bit easier. If I recall, I'm not looking at the stats like right in front of me. It really felt like a lot of his misses were from spots where you were like, okay, go out there. It's 4th and 8. If it was 4th and 2, we'd go for it. But it's 4th and 8, and might as well send Ethan out there to see what happens. So yeah, definitely a question mark with your kicking game. I think I didn't set an expectation, but I think hearing you say you kind of want him to be automatic from 40, that feels about right to me. If you can trot out there and 38 yarders are no problem, then I'm happy with it as long as your kicker's not a detriment to the game anymore. Like that's definitely not what you want. Where you get really nervous every time they go out. I don't know if that's going to happen, and I'm certainly hoping it doesn't. And then in terms of your punter, like I said, I'm actually really high on Liam Daughtery. On Liam, I think he's going to be even better this year. We've seen that development from him. Um, and so, like you said, hopefully less touchbacks this year. But you really hope you don't see your punter a ton. But that's another thing that can be a weapon for you. And we know how much Coach Fritz loves his special teams. And it's been surprising since he got here how like inefficient we've been on special teams in terms of kicking and receiving punts and kickoffs. So I'm really hoping that you see that kind of go to the next level this year. I think Paris Melvin's going to, as you said, really show his stuff out on special teams where you're going to really see them be able to get the ball in his hands. That's kind of why I took him in the touchdowns only draft. You could see him pop off for a kick return or two, and hopefully he becomes even early on in his career one of those do not punt to him kind of guys that you kind of saw with Marquez Stevenson in his final year here at U of H. So hopefully you see them just try to get the ball in Paris Melvin's hands and see what he can do.
Yeah, definitely the kind of difference maker athlete who you eventually see become a good return guy in college, even if that's a bit of a question at this point because everything is a bit of a question because he's never played a snap of college football. But guys like him, high level, shifty players like that genuinely often become that kind of difference maker at the college level.
Yep.
And maybe with the kicking game that you have an offense you're more confident in that maybe last year with an offense that was significantly improved, but still probably had another step to take to be very good or very good consistently. Maybe this year you're more confident going in some of the situations at the 4th and 8, but maybe, before you're in a 4th and 4 in a close game, it's like, okay, but we've got an automatic 3 here with Ethan Sanchez. Not that Willie Fritz is someone who's super conservative on go for it situations generally. I for the most part, I found myself these last 2 years agreeing with the go for it or not go for it decisions that we've generally made, but maybe you're a bit more aggressive this year too with a more experienced offense, and you're not having to lean. You're not going to lean on the kicking game as much. One, because you can't. Two, because you have the luxury of an offense that could potentially make those situations and convert, which maybe you weren't as confident in to varying degrees each of the last 2 seasons. And again, like you won't be able to truly make the case for a kicking unit this experience. But the good news is I don't think you should have too hard of a time making a case that the punting and return game aspects of this unit could be better than they were last season, or at least I haven't had a hard time doing that.
Yeah, I agree.
And since we had the return of Cougar Sports this past week, we will talk next about Houston Cougar Soccer's season opener at Florida Gulf Coast, a 0-0 tie that wasn't devoid of positives for the Cougars, but also I'd be lying if I came on here and said that was the undeserved result, that, the Cougars should have won, but for lack of luck or anything like that. I mean, ultimately in sports, you always deserve the result you get, whether that's soccer or whatever sport we're discussing at the time. But this wasn't the Cougs playing badly. but also this wasn't the Cougs significantly outplaying an opponent who just sat back and played for a tie. Whenever I say that, I think of the SFA game last season, which again, you deserve the result you get, but that one last season was very much SFA just sitting back and absorbing shot after shot after shot. I mean, in my opinion, if college soccer was still doing the old rules where you played extra time periods before they called a game a tie, I think this still would have been a 0-0 draw with neither team ultimately breaking through. I'll break down what I liked and didn't like from the first 90 minutes of on-field action that we've gotten to see in 2026. My notes just kind of organically became like this, and I was like, yeah, I'll kind of do it this way. And everything I say also comes with the caveat that we're talking about 5% of the season here. We're talking one game of 20, and things will necessarily look choppier out of the gates. What I did like was how defensively sound the Cougars were. I mean, there were stretches in the first half where Florida Gulf Coast had a lot of possession, and at no point was I ever really worried about any of the chances they got near the goal. I can't even give a grade of how your new goalkeeper, Sierra McClure, did, not because of anything bad she did, but because none of the shots really required her to do that much work. And that includes Cougar set piece defending, defending on corners, which FGCU had a good number of in the first half. And this is an opponent who didn't get shut out once at home last season. And so I think you could only take it as a positive that you shut them out and you weren't really lucky to get that clean sheet. I believed before the season this was going to be a good defensive team, or this was going to be a very good defensive team after being just a good one in 2025, and nothing I saw last Wednesday has really changed my opinion there. Ellen Morgan, I wanted to shout her out specifically. She really impressed me from the Cougar backline in her debut as well, coming off missing last season injured. At times, you got some good attacking movement from Blake Hodgson down the right wing, and even though the Cougs had the best scoring chance in the first half, nobody who watched the game would say that U of H was the better team in the first 45 minutes. The Cougs did create some dangerous chances, and you did finally make FGCU sweat a bit in the final 45 minutes, which kind of ties into my last positive point. I'd be less positive here if this was kind of the reverse, which is to say, let's say U of H had a stronger first half, you had some close chances, and then spent most of the second half just not having the ball, just struggling to string together a pass for phases. But in this case, you saw at the half, I mean, you can see this from watching the game, head coach Ben Williams on the sideline, not thrilled about a lot of what he saw in the first half, but you saw the team adjust. It looked a lot cleaner in the second half. You attacked with more teeth while still defending well enough that I was never really worried about the Cougs conceding a goal, and really did well specifically adjusting to the constant pressure that Florida Gulf Coast threw at you for large portions of the first half. Also, not sure about her end product, but Jada Arthurs, she played the tail end of the first half. She didn't start, but played the tail end of the first half, played nearly all the second half, and did a great job from her forward position, hustling and winning balls, holding the ball up as some of the larger attacking movement happened, which is really valuable. I would want her to be paired ideally with someone who's a bit more clinical, putting the ball in the net, because I gotta be honest, I didn't see a lot of that from her. But you really do need someone up front, not a smaller player, someone who's bigger, somebody who can mix it up with the opposing defenders, someone who could win balls back, someone who allows you to start attacking movements and doesn't get bullied off the ball easily by defenders. I saw a lot of that from Arthurs, and I don't think it's a coincidence that you looked a lot better or a lot more dangerous attacking when she was playing the majority of the second half. What I didn't like is that for a lot of the last 25 or 30 minutes of the first half, the Cougs struggled badly with FGCU's pressure. And this wasn't just FGCU winning back balls from the Cougs, but I mean, you saw at times, it reminded me a bit of what happens when you see, and it's a cross-sport reference here, you see teams playing, against Kelvin Sampson, U of H teams, and even when the Cougs aren't at the time putting a lot of pressure on, you see them misplay. They'll throw a pass out of bounds, or they'll just run out of time. You see it kind of get in the opponent's head, and you saw that manifest itself in Cougar players at times in that first half, misplaying not super difficult passes. And you could see Ben Williams on the sideline was very frustrated with a lot of what he saw. And the players themselves, I mean, you didn't have the best camera angle there. At times it was like looking into the brightest part of the sun with like the camera reflected back on itself. So, I'm not going to spend too much time criticizing FGC's production quality, but you could you could see the body language. They were frustrated at times in the first half with the pressure. Finishing wasn't great, and it is a definite positive that U of H was the team that I can take out my bias and say you probably had the best 2 or 3 chances of the game. The problem is you had 2 or 3 pretty good chances, and none of them really required the opposing goalkeeper to make a crazy save or anything. You didn't make them sweat nearly as much as you should have for how good some of those chances were. And I acknowledged before the season that where the goals would come from is a question. And also acknowledging that we're only 1 game into the season, you can't leave this game and say, "Oh, now I know where the goals are going to come from." I mean, I think you'd rather be in this scenario if you're going to be in a scenario where one of the units has question marks. I'd rather be in the one where the defense is really stout and reliable, but you're not going to accomplish all of your goals without being more dangerous in attack. I don't think that's a hot take there. So I talked plenty in this, Bobby. What were your big takeaways from this one? Things you liked and didn't like, all that from the Cougs season opener.
Yeah, I mean, I admittedly didn't watch this one live. I was, out celebrating, but I was getting some updates from you and co-host Emeritus Dustin on this one. And I went back to watch the game just to kind of see what y'all were talking about and see what I thought, rather than just kind of be like, oh, this is what the guy said. And I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised by what I saw. I thought the Cougs played pretty well. I think what you said about in terms of finishing, especially early on, was absolutely true. You had you took some shots that weren't even close to being on goal. Felt like the first 10, maybe 15 minutes of the game were pretty good for the Cougs. Florida Gulf Coast had some moments, but really, to me, just going back and watching the game, it felt like a lot of those moments that they got were not in strong build-up play, but were in kind of countering what the Cougs were doing and then settling in their final third, which gives me a little bit of hope in terms of what you said, the defensive, the ability of the defensive ability of this team, and that's not something I was necessarily shocked by heading into the season in last week's preview. One of the things you and I both mentioned was how good this defense was going to be, how excited we were to watch this team play defense, and then the midfield was pretty good too, and we were questioning where goals came from. The game kind of felt like it played out like that. I think I would be a lot more concerned if you saw Florida Gulf Coast really start to build up play through the midfield a lot more than I kind of saw when I went back and watched. I think there was a real chance for Florida Gulf Coast in the 36th minute, and where they had back-to-back shots. I don't know if you remember that, Sam, but they had some back-to-back shots, and I think maybe that made me think that the first half didn't go as well as maybe I think, because it did seem like Florida Gulf Coast kind of finished the half a lot stronger than the Cougs did.
Oh, yeah.
And it's definitely one of those situations where you're like, oh, how did man, that half could have gone a lot better. I think everything you pointed out was very true in terms of handling the pressure from an offensive side. You saw a lot of passes go to empty space, and players weren't making runs. I don't know if that's you brought in some transfers and they're trying to get used to playing with one another and some communication issues, or what that was. I did like that you pointed out that Coach Williams was upset by some of the passes. You could see kind of his frustration, especially in that first half. In the second half, I think you looked much cleaner. You look like the better team in the second half. You put up 10 shots. Again, you got to put them on net at some point, and that is something we were a little concerned about. This Florida Gulf Coast team last year was pretty good, and which I think you pointed out in the preview. They were a tournament team last year. They didn't lose a ton, kind of going back and listening to that god-awful color commentator who wasn't very good. But yeah.
Might have been watching his first soccer game for all we know.
Yeah. But like you said, you do still wonder who's going to be the goal scorer here. You didn't really see anyone kind of step up, especially if that's not obvious. A 0-0 draw does that, but I don't think this team's going to win many games 5-4. We're not going to have the the old school Cougar football style where you win 56-49. I think you're going to win a lot of games this year, 2-1, 3-1, something like that. So should be interesting to see who kind of steps up. You saw a couple of players try. You just got to, I think the most frustrating part was the fact that they just weren't even on goal. I think
Yeah.
you had space. You were creating space offensively to get shots off. They just weren't even close where you were making their goalie work that hard.
Yeah, no, I would agree with all that. I do like that Ben Williams challenged his team out of the gates, playing on the road against a perennially good smaller conference team, doing it on a lengthy road trip. You learned more about yourself and where you need to get better than, let's say, if you had played a team that you were going to be a heavy favorite against at home. I also liked last year when the Cougs started away at UTSA, a team that ended up being pretty good, won the American Championship and went to the NCAAs. I like for the second year in a row that you started the season off with a challenge. Would have obviously been happy with a win, but positives to be taken away and a chance for the coaches to now have actual game take to show the players, hey, this is where you need to be better. Hey, we still need to be better going forward. So up next, the Cougars will host Northwestern State on Thursday night for their home opener at the Carl Lewis International Complex. And Northwestern State's not a pushover. They won the Southland regular season title last season, though they did lose the Conference Player of the Year, Emily Senatore, to Oklahoma State, and also all-conference goalkeeper Kennedy Rist graduated, though they returned their number 2 goal scorer, Paige Baumgartner, all-conference defender Emma Pethel, and last year's Conference Freshman of the Year, Hosane Suku. Should be a multi-goal Cougar win. I do think this will look a little cleaner at home just because I think that's a general broad statement to make, that you're gonna look a little better playing your home turf than you do after traveling halfway across the country, not sleeping in your own bed, everything that goes with, regardless of sport, playing a contest away from home. But I also think Northwestern State is a good enough opponent that you could still learn things about from as well, which I think makes it a valuable home opener. On Sunday, the Cougars will return to action hosting Tarleton State at 1 p.m. The Texans drew A&M Corpus 2-2 on the road to start the season last Wednesday, which is their only on-field action of the season so far. They weren't that good in the WAC last season, lost their previous head coach late in the offseason, so lost nearly all of last season's key players to graduation from the portal. At the risk of being dismissive, probably a worse opponent than Northwestern State. Should be another multi-goal Cougar win if things go as they should on Sunday afternoon. When I saw this Sunday afternoon, I did a quick glance at my weather app. The high is supposed to be 98 in Houston on Sunday, so my rough math is the heat index should be somewhere around surface of the sun levels of hot. Definitely the kind of game where the hydration breaks that everyone hated during the World Cup are absolutely going to be necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of looking, Northwestern State played LSU and OU. Sam, did you see what
didn't go great against OU? You could say it, but
yeah.
I can remember didn't go great against OU.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, do you know what the combined score of those games were?
It was 9-0 for OU, right? Or was that LSU? I saw it was 9-0 for their opener.
No, you're right. You're right.
What was the other one? I actually missed that doing
LSU was 5-0. The crazy part to me was that they were tied at half 0-0. Which obviously be 0-0 if they lost 5-0 and were tied at half. Duh.
Yeah, but the I think that's still 5 goals and a half. That is might speak to some depth issues.
Yeah, but what I will say is 3 of LSU's goals came within 4 minutes. And then when Northwestern State was pressing, the final 2 came late in the game. So maybe there's something, if you can't score and you are missing somebody who can put the ball in the back of the net, maybe that could be a little bit of a problem, but I don't foresee that. And then Tarleton, like you said, wasn't very good in the WAC last year, but they did get a goal in their 2-2 game with A&M Corpus Christi, a transfer from Mississippi State named Freese. That's probably what they were expecting from her to come in from Mississippi State, a much, much higher level of competition, come in, score some goals. She got one, something the defense may need to look out for.
Yeah, if nothing else, the defensive performance against, I think, a Florida Gulf Coast team that's probably a good bit better than these two gives me confidence that is not specifically a big issue. I think you still need to see that first goal go in the net. You need to get that confidence attacking that, hey, we can create goals after 90 minutes of not doing it in your previous outing. But I'm pretty confident defensively the Cougars will do what they need to be able to do. And then you get yourself some confidence. That's what you get out of these games. Ultimately, most of the teams you see this year are going to be better than these two, but just get yourself some confidence. Get yourself some belief that we could put the ball in the back of the net, even knowing it's going to be a lot harder later in non-conference when you get Memphis and Vandy, and certainly when you get to Big 12 play against that level of competition. But you just got to see the ball go in the back of the net sometimes. And you kind of saw that last year. You got off to a slow start, at least offensively, and then you got a little, even though it never fully got going, you got at least a little bit more confidence from some of those easier non-conference games, which I think you're hoping is happening. Hope is happening here. I don't know why that was so hard to say, Bobby, but we'll credit that to an hour plus of podcasting at this point.
Of course. So, Sam, I think that's everything, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that is it for this week's episode of the Scott and Holman podcast. We want to thank you so much for listening. If you have any feedback for us, you can find us on social media at SH Podcast on Twitter. If you are on Blue Sky, you can find us at podcast.bsky.social. If you want to email us, you can find us at shpodcast@gmail.com. If you really want us to pay attention, you can find us on Patreon, patreon.com/shpodcast. $5 a month gets you some premium content during the season. We are going to do some really cool stuff, instant reacts, things of that nature. So really looking forward to doing that. Sam, I think I covered everything. What do we always say here, buddy?
Go Cougs.
All right. Go Cougs! Let's go!